Hey guys, welcome back to another free training. And today's training is all about how to run comps like a pro.
House so easy, we close fast, and anytime that works for you. Your house don't need it, we'll throw cash, it hits so fast, don't know what to do.
Hey guys, welcome back to another free training provided inside of Real Estate School. My name is David Dodge, and today I will be your host as well as your coach. And today's training is all about how to run comps like a pro. And one of the things that, we really need to understand and we really need to get good at in the business of real estate investing, wholesaling, fix and flipping, landlording, whatever. It doesn't matter what exit strategy we decide on. We need to understand that running comps is very, very, very important. And it's important for a couple of reasons. The main reason is when we're making our offers, we need to essentially start with the ARV, the after repair value of a property, and then multiply it by a discount rate to offset the cost to sell the deal as well as our profit, and then subtract out the repairs, which then gives us a offer price or a max allowable offer price. But in order to even determine what a good offer price is going to be, we need to start with the ARV. Well, how do we start with an ARV, or how do we determine what a good ARV for a property is going to be? And the way that we do that is by running comps. And comps is really just short for comparables. So when we are running comps, we are looking for comparable properties that have sold recently. Okay. And there's a couple of different criteria that we're going to jump into here. And then we're going to actually go run some comps. And then if you all have any questions towards the end, we can obviously open it up for a quick Q&A and answer any questions that you all may have. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to jump on in and we're going to talk about this. And by the way, as of today's recording, May 9th, 2023, we already have 567 members in Real Estate School. We got a ton of offerings in the courses area. The calendar is filled up with all sorts of free trainings and events, as well as the leaderboard. So it's a really, really great community here. I'm really happy to have put this together and have you guys to be a part of this. I am going to open up my chat box so I can monitor that here in the meantime. Okay, so running comps like a pro. Well, let's start with what are comps, right? What does that mean? Well, what that means is comparable sold properties. So we're going to use the comparable sold properties to essentially determine what our ARV is going to be. So we're going to use the comparable sold properties, which is going to essentially give us the after repair value or the ARV. So we'll spell that out. After repair value. Okay. So when we are running comps, we're looking for the sold properties and the sold properties that have sold within a certain duration, within a certain distance, as well as have a likeness. All right. Now, there are active and there are pendings as well. And we're going to get into this a little bit later, but we're not typically using our actives and or our pending properties when we are running our comps. And the reason that we're not going to essentially use those is because when we are running our comps, we really care more about the comparable sold properties, right? Knowing what's out there in terms of what's actively on the market or what's pending on the market can be helpful to kind of understand if the market's hot or if it's cold, how much inventory there may be out in the open market at the current time. But actives don't necessarily mean that that they're going to sell, right? And the pendings don't always close. So again, the most important thing that we want to keep in mind here is that when we are running our comps, we want to be looking at the sold properties. So it's very, very important. Now, once we find and locate the sold properties, we are really going to be breaking these down using these three little categories right here. So duration. Well, duration is time. And ideally, we want to be 6 to 12 months from the sale date when we're running our comp. So it's very important that we're not looking at properties that have sold 3 years ago or 5 years ago. Ideally, you want to be as recent as possible. So I'm going to write that in here, recent as possible, okay? When it comes to the distance, right? This is going to be the distance from your subject property to the other sold properties that have sold in the area recently, okay? So distance, I often like to start at a 1/4 mile, and I'll sometimes go to a 1/2 mile. But again, ideally, the closer, the better. And there's some things that you want to keep in mind here whenever you are talking about the distance, right? Number one is the closer the better is going to be ideal, right? But also sometimes you may have an area where a major highway or a major road comes through and goes through your circle, right? You may have different school districts, right? You may have different zip codes, and these can affect the pricing. So not only do you want it to be very, very close to your subject property, the closer the better, but you also want to keep in mind that, you know, there are things that will affect the comps, right? So a couple of those might be, you know, schools, zip codes, etc. And we'll get into that here in a little bit, right? But the third thing I want to mention today is the likeness. And the likeness is really referred to as the similar property types, okay? The similar property types. And what I mean by that is when we are comping properties, we don't want to comp a property that is, let's say, a 2-bedroom, 2-bath property to another sold property that may be a 5-bedroom, 3-bath, right? So we're going to try to keep the number of bedrooms, the number of bathrooms, and the number of square foot as close as possible. So beds, baths, and square footage of the property is going to be very important. Additionally, you don't want to comp, you know, a 3-story home to a slab ranch, right? Again, the type of property, and I'm going to add that in here as type, or likeness of the property is very, very important. So in a perfect world, guys and girls, we are going to want to comp a property that is going to be very, very, very similar to our subject property, right? The more similar, the better. So if you have a ranch property that's 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and let's say it's 1,400 square foot, you should be looking for comparable sold properties, comps, comparables, that are also 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch properties as close to 1,400 square foot as possible. Now, if you are not able to find the exact property, that's okay. You're going to want to try to find the ones that are the most like yours. Okay. When it comes to beds, ideally you find the same number of bedrooms. When it comes to bathrooms, ideally you want to find the same number of bathrooms. But if you can't find the same, just find the ones that are as close as possible. When it comes to square footage, you're really going to be plus or minus about 20 square foot. 20% of the square foot. So for example, if you have a subject property that's 1,000 square foot, you don't really want to be looking at properties that are less than 800 square foot or above 1,200 square foot, plus or minus 20% on either side. Okay. So if that number's larger, let's say that you are at a 2,000 square foot property, again, 20% on either side. Now, if you can narrow that even greater or even more, that's going to be even better. Okay. But on a 2,000 square foot property, you don't typically want to be looking at properties less than 1,600 square foot and or above 2,400 square foot, because that would be your 20% on either side. So you want to make sure that you're trying to keep it within those parameters. So bedrooms, similar as possible. Bathrooms, similar as possible. Square foot, plus or minus 20% on either side at the most. If you can get tighter and smaller and more similar, the better. Okay, keep that in mind. And then last but not least, when it comes to likeness, The type of property matters. You don't want to comp a ranch to a 3-story. You don't want to comp a 2-story to a 4-story, right? You want to keep them similar. Comp ranches to ranches, comp 1-stories to 1-stories, or 2-stories to 2-stories, or 1.5 stories to 1.5 stories. Now, again, if you can't find the exact bed, the exact bath, and the exact type, that's okay. You're going to have to learn how to adjust for these differences. And we can talk about that here towards the end. But what really matters, guys and girls, what really, really matters is that we are finding the duration, the distance, and the likeness as similar as possible when we are looking at our sold properties that have sold in the vicinity recently. So in a perfect world, I'm looking for a 4th mile, I'm looking for 6 months, and I'm looking for the exact type as well as the exact bed, bath, and square footage. Okay, so keep that in mind. The more similar, the better. So I'm going to say in a perfect world, right, or in a perfect comp, this is what we want right here. All right, we want to make sure that these are small in terms of distance. Okay, we want to make sure the duration is recent. Okay, and we want to make sure that the likeness of the property is as like your subject property as possible. And again, we are only typically going to be looking at the sold comps. And the reason is because these are what the appraisers are going to be using when they come out and they do an appraisal. Appraisers aren't typically looking at the actives or the pendings. All right. Now, again, we may want to look at those to kind of get a gauge on what's happening in the market. But what matters to banks and appraisers, which essentially is going to give you an ARV, an appraisal is basically saying this is what the bank thinks the property's worth. Well, you know, when we're going to buy a property, we may not use a bank. We may use private or hard money, but when we fix it up and sell it, our buyers are going to have a bank 99% of the time, 95% of the time, right? A big portion of the time. So the ARV essentially stands for the after repair value, but it's also a guesstimate of what the property will appraise for. So keep this in mind, okay? So duration, 6 to 12 months. In the event that you can't find anything in 12 months, you can go out a little farther, but I would caution you, do not go beyond 18 months because a lot of things can change over 18 months. In fact, a lot of things can change in 12 months. So the more recent, the better, okay? Same with the distance. 1/4 mile is going to be ideal. If you're in a super densely populated area, you might not want to go beyond there. You might not need to go beyond there. If you are out in the middle of the country and there might not be any properties that have sold in, let's say, 12 or even 18 months in a 1/2 mile, then you may want to take it out to a 3/4 mile or even a mile. But again, the closer, the better is going to be ideal. All right. And then last but not least, the likeness. It's so incredibly important, guys. So when running comps like a pro, and I would consider myself to be a pro, I've been running comps daily for about 8 years and bought and sold over 1,000 properties in the last 8 years. I can tell you that, you know, when we're running comps, we don't want to get analysis paralysis. We do want to find recent sold properties. We do want to find nearby sold properties, and we want to find properties that are as similar as possible, okay? But we don't necessarily need to spend 30 minutes or 40 minutes running comps. Often when I'm running comps, I'll maybe spend between 5 and 10 minutes running my comps. And then I'm pretty certain at that point what the ballpark of the property is going to be, okay? So let's go ahead and jump in. Let's run some comps. I'm going to actually open up the microphone for all you guys and girls. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask. The actives and the pending is really going to be more so, for, market analysis versus comps, right? I'm not really looking at the actives and the pendings when I'm running comps, right? That's really more so for the sold properties. Okay. So keep that in mind. Also, if you guys are new to real estate investing and you're looking for a place to run comps nationwide, Batch Leads is the place to go to run comps nationwide. Batchleads.io/Dave. I'll drop this link in the call replay. This link will give you all a 7-day free trial, and it'll also give you 1,000 buyer or seller leads included with that free trial for free. So you guys can go check it out for an entire week. You can get 1,000 buyer or seller leads that you can then download and utilize for your business. But Batch Leads is a phenomenal tool, not only for leads and skip tracing and SMS and driving for dollars and having different workspaces and reports, direct mail, creating lists of sellers and buyers, but also for determining values of properties, running comps, and figuring out as much data and information about a subject property as possible. Okay. So I am going to go to my wall here and I'm going to look for a property that we can use. 3904 Gustine is one that I own. So we're going to use that 3904 Gustine. And that is here in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click search on here. And for all those that are here with me today, go ahead and drop a comment for me or unmute your mic just for a second and make sure that you guys all can see my screen. I want to make sure you all can see my screen so I'm not talking to myself and just wasting time here. Can you guys all see my screen? Got quite a few people on today, which is great. I love seeing all these faces. Miss Ralphie, Javier, Richard, Thomas, Roe, and Mike. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right. We have a yes in the comment. Okay, good deal. All right. So what I've just done is I've just used Batch Leads and I've typed in an address over here in the property search area and I found the address. Here it is. And you can use Batch Leads to run comps in all 50 states. It's amazing. It's an amazing software. Okay. So as you can see here that this property is one of my properties. It's owned in Rainy Days LLC. You can see this is a 4-bedroom, 1-bath property. And the total living area in this particular property is 2,426 square foot. It's built in 1936. So one of the great things about Batch Leads is it's going to give you tons and tons and tons of information. Okay. Very, very cool. But this training right here is really more so about running comps. So I'm going to click on this comparable tab and show you how easy Batch Leads makes running comps for you. Okay. So what happens when I click on that comparable tab is it's going to default to the property class, which is going to be the type of property. So this is a residential property. Sometimes you want to double check that. The property type is a single family. Now, again, whenever we're talking about the likelihood of the likeness, I should say, of a property, age is also something that we want to keep in mind. It's not necessarily a make or break, but just think, does it make sense to comp a property? If let's say our subject property is this one here, it was built in 1936. It doesn't really make sense to try to comp this property to a property that was built in, let's say, 2015, an 8-year-old property. Whereas this property here is, 70 years old, give or take, right? So you also want to try to keep it within a similar time frame. And one of the great things about Batch is they give you the ability to ignore when it was built or have it built within 5 or 10 or 20 years. The default is 10, and I usually like to keep it at that number. And if I need to change it, I can. Okay. So again, property class, residential, it's already defaulted to that. Single family is what this is. Now, if you're wanting to comp a duplex or a triplex or a multifamily property, keep in mind, you want to make sure that it's a similar property type. Okay. We're not going to comp a piece of land, a vacant, raw piece of land to a 10-unit apartment building. Guys, these are two totally different types of property. So we're going to want to comp land to land, single family to single family, 10 units to 10 units, industrial to industrial, so on and so forth. Okay, definitely want to keep that in mind. Now, it's also going to default to sold, active, and pending. And what I like to do when I'm running comps is just remove my actives and my pendings, just because it's not relevant for me to determine an ARV. Yes, actives and pending properties will give us an idea of what's out there and what kind of inventory is out there, right? To where we can help understand the market a little bit better. But that data doesn't necessarily help us determine the value of our subject property. Keep that in mind. Okay. Sold in the last 12 months. What I like to typically do, and you can even see, you can go to 1 month, 3 months, or 6 months. I like to typically start at about 6 months, and I like to keep the built within 10 years on there, like the default, like it has. I'm going to ignore bedrooms and bathrooms for now. I'm going to keep the square footage plus or minus 20 square foot, which is the default. But what I want to do is I want to take this from a mile down to a quarter mile. And again, the reason is we want to go to 6 months, quarter mile, and then look for similar property types. Now, one of the great things is it's already going to give us residential. It's already going to give us single family. So it's going to weed out all that other stuff. And I'm not necessarily worried about the bedrooms and the bathrooms at this point in time, because I can go and I can adjust that later. Okay. Lot square footage would be something that, you may want to dive deeper into down the road. But again, because of the fact that we want to first see what kind of results we're going to get, we don't really want to mess with any of this other stuff. The main things, let's quickly review: 6 months, quarter mile, 20% plus or minus on the square foot, built within 10 years, and sold data. So let's go ahead and click filter once we've changed some of our information. And you can see that we only have one comp right here for this criteria. And I can actually select the map and zoom out so you can get an idea of where on the map this property's at. Now, this is a great example here because I only have one comp. So I'd like to get more than one comp, right? Usually I like to typically get somewhere between 3 and 5 comps. If I can't get 5, not the end of the world, but I usually like to see at least 2 or 3 comps to get a really, really good understanding. If I'm getting like 10 or 15 or 20 comps, that's most likely too many, right? And what I want to do is I want to use the criteria within batch leads, the filtering, to filter out some of these. Most likely get rid of the ones that are far away, most likely get rid of the ones that are old. The more recent and the more close in proximity, the better. Okay. So this one right here is just a couple blocks away. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, there is Merrimack going through here, which is a pretty decent sized road, but I know this area pretty well. And this is all very, very similar. But one thing to keep in mind, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is when you're crossing major roads like Chippewa or Route 66 right here, or even more so, even more major roads like major highways, you want to keep in mind that the neighborhoods can change. The amount of crime in those neighborhoods can change. The school districts can change, and the zip codes can change as well. So I don't want to get too far into the weeds on that right at the moment, but keep in mind that these things do matter. The closer to the subject property, the better. And the more recent, the better. So those are really the first two things: distance and duration. Well, once we get our comps, as you can see that are outlined down here on the bottom, then the likeness of the property becomes more important. But out of the gate, the likeness, the number of beds, the number of baths, the number of square foot isn't as important. That's really kind of secondary to the duration, which is the time in which our subject property, has a comparable sold, as well as the distance. In my opinion, the duration and the distance is the most important. And those are the things that we want to start with. And then once we start getting some comps, then we're going to want to go look and dive into the actual likeness of the property. Now, I already know that the likeness is pretty close because it is residential only, and it is single family only. If I was comping like a duplex, which we can do next, I'd really only want to be looking at the duplexes in the area. All right. Again, the more like, the better. Okay. So in this scenario, we only have one comp, and that's really not that great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my duration out to 12 months. I really want to keep my proximity to 1/4 mile. And the reason is because I am in a very, very, very densely populated part of South St. Louis. Okay. If you are out in the middle of the country, sure, you can take it to 1/2 mile or 3/4 mile, maybe even a mile or beyond. You know, I've even had to run comps in some cases where I've gone 2 to 3 miles, but you never, ever, ever want to go that far out when you're in a super densely populated property or area like I am right here, right? What you want to focus on is very close in proximity, okay? So now that I've changed it from 6 months to 12 months, and I still have built within 10 years and located within 1/4 mile, I've clicked filter, and look what that's done. That has given me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 comps against my 3904 Gustine subject property that we're using today, you know, as the example here, okay? So now that I've done that, I can take a look at the map and I can see where these properties are all at. If you're using batch, you'll notice that your subject property is always going to have a yellow star. And if you hover over it, it'll show you a picture of that property. And then I can also hover over these other little pins to kind of see what these properties look like. Or if I want to deep dive into them, I can click on these properties. Or actually, I'd go down here and click on them. And a new tab will open up and it'll give you more information about that subject property. Some properties even have photos in here, which is really cool. I can look at the map and I can see a map view. I can look at a satellite view. I can even drop my little guy on the map and use a Google Street View right here within Batch Leads. So you have such awesome amount of information in here. Okay, so since I am within 1/4 mile, I am within 12 months of the sold, and I am within 10 years, I got myself 5 comps. Now, the only problem I see is that my subject property is a 4-bed, 1-bath, and it's 2,400 square foot. Now, I know it's not going to give me any comps outside of my plus or minus 20 square foot because that's the filter and that's the criteria that I have set. If I wanted to go bigger or less, I could choose those, but I typically like to keep that at plus or minus 20 square foot. So you can see subject properties, 2,400 square foot right here. And then some of these comps here are showing that they have, you know, very similar square footage. However, though, most of these comps, it looks like actually all of these comps are 2-bed, 1-bath properties. And if let's make my screen just a little bit bigger so we can see a little bit more of this. You can also see the property type. You can see the date in which they were sold, and then you can see your sales price. Now, keep in mind, Batch Leads is going to give you an estimated value of the property. And from my experience, the estimated value they give you is really, really good. Okay. Your market may be different. Keep that in mind. But from my experience, and I've comped properties all over the United States, helping lots and lots of students over the years, and Batch Leads has got a really, really good amount of data to really help with that. Some people will go to Zillow and they'll look at the Zillow Zestimate, especially the owner or the seller of the property. So this estimate actually says 208,000, which I believe is a little bit aggressive. Batch is giving me a comp much closer to about 150,000. Okay, so definitely keep that in mind. Now, in regards to my price, my comps down below here, again, this is within 12 months. This is 1/4 mile, 20% plus or minus. Let's say that, for example, I wanted to get rid of the ignore the year built. And, you know, when you're down in the South City area, you know, being within 10 years isn't necessarily as important, right? But it can be very valuable. So now that I've ignored that, you can see that we actually have a few more comps. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it added 2 more comps just by ignoring the year built. If I wanted to keep it within 20 or 30 years, that's also an option as well. Okay. So let's go over here and let's take a look at our comps, for example. Now, I still don't see any 4-bedroom properties in the area, which, isn't the end of the world, because when you have properties that have a large square footage, 24, 22, basically above 2,000, it's really not that difficult to add a 3rd or a 4th bedroom. Okay. So ideally you'd want it to be the same bed, the same bath, and the same square footage. But in the event that you can't find those, not a big deal. In certain parts of town, you're going to want to adjust up or down for certain things. So let's just say, for example, that our comp has 4 bedrooms, which it does. And all these comparable sold properties have only 2. Well, I would basically put a number on our comp a little bit higher than these comparable properties, right? Because our property is a little bit more desirable. So, what are we really doing? Let's just take a break from looking at batch just for a second here. What are we really doing when we're running comps? Well, let's be honest. We're guessing. We're guessing at what we think the property will be worth once it is fixed up, right? What is the after repair value of a property? Well, I can tell you right now, if you ask me and you ask 5 other real estate professionals to run comps on a particular property, not all 5 of us are going to come up with the exact same number. 2 or 3 of us might get within 10% of each other, but we all may come up with a little bit different numbers. And I know this may seem confusing, but the reason is because we're all guessing on what the property will be worth once it's fixed up. But here's the variable that everybody is going to have a little different. What I may spend to fix a property up may be a lot different than what you spend. Whenever I'm buying a property, I can rehab it to make it rent ready. I can rehab it to make it fix and flip ready, or I can over rehab it to make it ready for me to move in, because I like nice things and I want my property that I live in to be awesome. So I might spend a lot more money than I normally would spend if I'm going to move into it. If I'm going to rent it, I'm going to spend a lot less money fixing that property up than if I'm going to move in. So depending on the amount of repairs that go into the property is going to determine or predict, help us predict what the after repair value is. Think about this for a second, guys. The after repair value, it's after the repairs. It has to include those repairs. Now, when we're looking at our comps, we're getting ballparks. That's really all we're looking at. We're getting ballparks of what else is being sold in the area. Okay, so let's jump back into batch. And I'm going to just kind of, talk through this here. But again, we're looking at a lot of 2-bed, 1-baths. We're looking at very similar square footage properties. And you can see here's some of the different sale prices and dates, right? We have 158, 126, 171, 72, 157, 128, and 162. So what I like to typically do is I like to remove some of these outliers, right? Some of these properties that have really low purchase prices here. And the reason is these properties typically needed work. This also kind of shows you what investors are paying for properties that need work in the area. So you can kind of use the comps and see what's sold recently within a very close proximity. And of course, recently to kind of see what some of the other investors are buying properties at. Pro tip. Okay. Now the other ones, right? I have a 158, a 126, a 170, a 154, and a 128. I'm going to go ahead and plus up these ones here. Notice that my estimated value over here is going to change when I toggle a property on or off. So let's find the highest one, this 171 right here. Let's toggle this 4023 Baumgartner to no, for example. Well, my estimated value goes to 149. But if I toggle that one back on, it goes to 160. That's a difference of $11,000. So you really want to have a couple of good comps, at least 2 or 3 at a minimum, ideally 4 or 5 comps. You don't need 20, like I mentioned earlier, but you typically want to try to find at least 3 to 5. So right here between, just these properties, the ones that I've thumbed up, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 properties, and those properties average together give me $160,000 value. The estimated value that I'm getting over here on batch is 147, but I'm going to lean more towards 160. And the reason is because my property has 4 bedrooms and 1 bath, while all the other comparable recently sold properties only have 2 bedrooms. So I'm going to basically say, all right, I think mine's going to have a little bit higher number than the average of those, due to the fact that my property has a few more bedrooms. So what do you put on a property, or what do you put on the value of a bedroom or a bathroom or smaller square footage or higher square footage? And there's no black or white answer to that question, unfortunately. We are going to need to look at the neighborhood. We're going to need to look at the other houses. In some cases, a bedroom might be worth 5 or 10,000. In other cases, it might be worth 40 or 50,000. It just depends on the neighborhood. But just keep in mind, if the average property values are, let's say, $150,000 to $160,000, and there are some comps that maybe have a few more bedrooms, and they're not going up by, let's say, only, $8,000 or $10,000, then we can basically see, okay, this one sold for $8,000 or $10,000 more because it has 1 bedroom more. That basically tells us that bedrooms in this particular part of town are worth roughly $8,000 or $10,000. So we're going to want to dive into these comps, and we're going to want to dive into the data to get a really good understanding. Now, from the hip right here, I'm going to tell you that we have 5 good comps. All right. Now, again, ours is a 4-1. All the rest of these are 2-1. So ours has more bedrooms, but it has the same number of baths, and it has a very similar square footage size because I put 20% plus or minus on my square foot. I did ignore the year built. However, if you look right here, you can see that all of these properties were built around the 1930s, give or take, right? 1936 is our subject property of 1930, 1926, 1926. There is a 1914, but guys, that's not that much older in comparison, right? 36, that would be about 75, give or take, years old. In 1914 would be, about 100 years, give or take. But the difference between 75 and 100 in terms of percentages is not that much, right? So, if you were seeing properties built in 1990 or 2000, they probably wouldn't be a good fit for a 1936. But whenever they're within a few 10, 15, 20%, give or take, not a huge deal. All right. Year built is really not that important. The most important thing from my experience is, again, it's the stuff right here. It's the duration. You want to be within 6 to 12 months. Start small. Pro tip, start small, right? Start tight, okay, in terms of your duration. So sometimes you could even go to 3 months. Distance, start tight. Once again, 1/4 of a mile. If you need to go to a 1/2 mile, that's fine. If you need to go to a mile, I get it. But do not go above a 1/2 mile in densely populated areas. And again, start small. I always start with 1/4 mile and 6 months, as you all saw so far. And then the likeness, the age, the type, the square footage, the beds, the bath, ranches to ranches, 2 stories to 2 stories. That can actually be done once you get yourself some comps, okay? So let's go run comps on one more property real quick, and then I'm going to open it up for a Q&A, and I hope everyone's having a good day. Let me look and see another address. Let's find a duplex. All right, I got one. 528 Dover. This is one that I own, and this property, I think it might actually be listed for sale at the moment. I'm not sure if we have it listed or not. But again, this is a 4-bedroom. This is actually a 2-bath. That's wrong. It's a 4-2. But it's a 2-unit. It's a duplex. Okay. It's 3,970 square foot. Now, keep in mind, the data in here is not always 1,000% 1,000% accurate, right? But it's pretty damn close. And if you wanted to get a second opinion, you could obviously copy this address over into Zillow like I did before, and you could get some information from Zillow. So Zillow shows that it's active and that it's a 4.2, 2,650 square foot. This is one that we own, and it's a great duplex. We have a good amount of equity in this property. So sometimes we'll list our properties just to see if we can cash out. Why not, right? That's the point. So this is showing me that there's an estimated value on this property of about $306,000. We have ours listed for $289,000. Okay. So Batch is a little aggressive on the estimated value right here, but that's okay. So again, if we click here into our comparables screen, look at that. Boom. You can see actives. You can see pendings. You can see the solds. It's going to give us a mile in 12 months. I'm going to double check that we're looking at residential only because that's what we got. And then look here. It's already set to look at duplexes because that's what my property, my subject property is in this case. It's a duplex. So let's go ahead and get rid of the active. Let's go ahead and get rid of the pendings. Again, I want to start at 6 months. I'm going to ignore the year built because it's in the city and most of these properties are old. And I'm going to take my range or my distance. Duration is the time, distance is the radius, right? And I want to take that down to a 1/4 mile. I'm going to keep plus or minus 20 square foot, and then I'm going to click filter. So instead of seeing all of those properties that you saw before, now we only have one comp and it's showing for 49,000. That must have been one that needed a ton of work. So what I've done is I've gone too tight right here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it out to 12 months and I'm going to go slow and I'm going to just see what happens. All right. Going from 6 months to 12 months added 3 additional sold comps. And notice that they're all on the same side of the highway. I love that because what that typically means for me is that the zip codes are all going to be the same. These are all going to be in the same neighborhood, essentially the same school district, definitely the same county and the same municipality. So definitely something to keep track of. If I had comps over here and over here and over here, might not be the best comps to look at. And that's another reason why you can plus up and plus down these comps. Now look at this. By going back to 12 months, 1/4 mile, plus or minus 20 square foot, and I did ignore the year built because I don't really care in this scenario here. You can see that I actually have 3 duplexes that have sold on this street recently. There is one for 244, one for 208, and one for 265. I'm going to take off this 705 Wilmington one because it's 49,000. That's just not right. Now the beds aren't showing on here, but I know that we're looking at duplexes because I have the duplexes selected. If you're looking at triplexes or quads or 5+, you're going to want to select the properties that are going to be, again, the most similar property types to the one that you are comping. Okay. So in this case, we're getting an estimated value of around 240,000. Now, that's actually not a bad price. We have ours listed for 290,000. And, we think that's probably a little bit aggressive in terms of, getting someone to ask us that full price offer. We're basically thinking that we're going to sell this for somewhere around 260, 265, give or take. That's kind of what we think it's worth. And this right here is showing comps around 240. Okay. But again, ours is nice. We've done some really good repairs to the property. It's also rented. Okay. So the reason that we're taking ours from 240 to about 260, 265 is because of what I was stating earlier. The after repair value needs to incorporate the repairs. Think about this for a second. What's the after repair value of a property? Well, I don't know what that's going to be unless I determine the amount of repairs that I'm going to put into this one. Well, this one here, I've already done the repairs. Usually I'm going to guess on those repairs, and I'm going to guess based upon what the other properties, the other comps that are out there are actually going to look like. So one of the great things that we can do is we can take a look at some of these comps as an example here. I'll show you, and we can kind of see the the pictures. So some of these only have one picture, but some of these properties have multiple. So this one right down the street at 615 actually has some other photos. So I can kind of view through these, and you can make this bigger, and you can kind of see, okay, this is a good shape property. It has good floors, has nice walls, nice trim, you know, updated vinyl windows. Bathroom looks clean. Again, looks clean in the bathroom. And that's really all the pictures that they have. So having the ability to look at the pictures, sometimes I'll even go to Zillow to look at those pictures, will help us determine what the kind of repairs we need to get to in order to match it up to our particular property. So guys and girls, don't overcomplicate it. I'm going to wrap this up because I don't want to keep this, I don't want to make this training too long. But the most important things that we can do when we are comping properties is we want to make sure that we keep it simple, and we want to follow these sold property guidelines right here. Always find properties that are recently sold. All right. Ideally recent as possible, right? I like to start at 6 months. When you're talking about the distance, a quarter mile is going to be ideal. If you can't find anything with a quarter mile, go to a half a mile. If you can't find enough comps at 6 months, go to 12 months. But I can tell you right now, I would be hard pressed to go above a half a mile or above 12 months anywhere within the city limits of any city, right? Instead of going farther out in terms of my duration or farther out in terms of my distance, what I would most likely want to do would be to go and ignore the year built or increase the year built, right? And or increase maybe the square footage of the property or something along those lines. But when you're in highly densely populated areas like we are right here, you don't want to go too far out. So let's just do an example here. Let's say I did take this to a half a mile and I went it to 12 months and I ignored my year built and I went to filter. This is going to give me a lot more comps. So it might even be a good idea to look at some of these other comps here, right? It might even increase my value and get closer to that 265 number that I'm pretty confident that we could sell it for, right? So I can go over here and I can look at my prices. Well, 49, that one's way too low. 74, that one's way too low. 85, that one's way too low. But I do see that I have a couple others here. I have a 159, a 198, a 155, and a 204. So I want to add that 204. And, you know, these other ones, if I wanted to dive deeper, there are photos of those and I could go in and I could look at those particular properties. But, you know, at the end of the day, I don't want to be looking at these properties over here. They're too far away. All right. Across a major highway or a major divide is going to give me a whole different neighborhood for the most part. One last thing I want to mention, then I am going to truly open this up for a Q&A. You can also use some really, really cool tools, and you can say, hey, show me all the comps within this area right here. You can actually use these little features right here to draw on the map. And I can say, hey, show me all the comps within this particular area right here. Or you can use this tool right here and you can actually draw around the neighborhood in which that you want to stay within. So let's say that there's a couple roads, and let's just say that I know that once you cross over Delano, for example, the neighborhood changes or the zip code changes. So you can not only search within a proximity of a quarter mile or a half a mile or whatever, but you can also draw on the map to help narrow in the region in which you are looking for. So guys, keep in mind, Batch Leads is the best tool to run comps nationwide, all 50 states. I'm going to give you guys a coupon code. That code is Dave. You can use this link to get a free trial. I highly recommend it. And with that being said, let's wrap it up and let's open this up for a quick Q&A. So what you guys got?
House so easy, we close fast, and anytime that works for you. Your house don't need it, we'll throw cash, it hits so fast, don't know what to do. Wanted her care to keep it, no